Jungkook's POV. The office was buzzing with energy, but all I could hear were the voices of the executives in my ear as I reviewed the latest deal. The meeting had dragged on for hours, and now, with the end in sight, I was trying to focus on finalizing the details. My mind, however, was constantly bouncing between thoughts of numbers, projections, and the ever-growing pile of paperwork that needed my attention. Jimin Hyung walks beside me, flipping through documents, offering his own insights into the deal. His casual demeanor contrasted with the sharpness in his eyes, always alert, always thinking. It was almost impressive how effortlessly he could manage the flow of business while keeping up with me. "We're almost done here," Jimin said, his voice pulling me back to the present. "This deal is solid, Jungkook. I think you'll be happy with the results." I nodded absently, scrolling through the final set of figures on my tablet. Just then, as I rounded the corner, I felt a sudden jolt, a soft collision that threw me off balance for a moment. I looked down to see a young woman, small and unsteady, who had bumped straight into me. Her eyes widened in surprise, panic flickering across her face. She was devastated, her clothes clinging to her skin as if she'd been caught in the rain. Before I could speak, her voice trembled with an apology. "Y/N, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." She didn't wait for me to respond though. She immediately pulled away, as if the encounter had been a mistake, too personal, too close. In an instant, she was gone, rushing down the hallway as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. I stood there, a little stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Jimin, who had witnessed the entire interaction, raised an eyebrow. "She okay?" I glanced at him, still trying to make sense of the situation. "I think so." She looked panicked. "Who is she?" Jimin chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "That's Y/N. She works here part-time. She's been here for a few weeks now." "Part-time?" I asked, confused. When did we hire someone for a part-time position? I don't remember approving that. Jimin gave me a sheepish smile. "You were in Spain for business when she was recruited. I guess I forgot to tell you about it." "Why wasn't I informed?" I asked, my tone more sharp than I intended. Jimin shrugged nonchalantly. "I thought you had bigger things to focus on. Anyway, she's good, doesn't cause trouble. You'd like her if you got to know her. But she's always rushing around, looking stressed." I don't why, when I asked her she just ignored saying nothing. Must be boyfriend issues. I frowned, watching the spot where she had disappeared. There was something about her, something that made me curious, despite myself. She wasn't like the others around here, and there was an air of desperation that clung to her, something that went beyond just the usual office drama. But I didn't say anything more. Instead, I turned my attention back to the tablet, though my thoughts kept wandering back to her, the girl who had bumped into me so unexpectedly, who had seemed so lost in her own world. That's when I realized she's the same girl from hospital. Y/N's POV. I ran faster, ignoring the sting in my ankle from where I twisted it when I bumped into that person in the office. I burst through the hospital doors, my hair plastered to my face and my breath hitching as I tried to find my voice. "Where is she? My mother, where is she?" The nurse at the reception pointed me toward the emergency room, and I didn't even wait to hear the rest. I raced down the hallway, the fluorescent lights blurring as I pushed past doctors and nurses. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, drowning out every other sound. When I reached the ER, I saw my mother on a gurney, surrounded by medical staff, wires, and tubes connected to her, her face pale and slack. A doctor was speaking, but the words barely registered. My knees went weak, and I grabbed the edge of the gurney to keep from collapsing. "Please. Please, you have to help her. Do whatever it takes. I don't care about the money, I'll find a way, I swear. Just, please, don't let her die." Author's POV. The doctors hesitated, and Y/N's desperation became a tangible thing. Her voice broke, and she clutched the doctor's sleeve with shaking hands. There was no money for surgery, and they all knew it. She had maxed out every credit card, begged, and borrowed every penny she could scrape together, but it was never enough. "Doctor, we'll do what we can, but you need to authorize the procedure. It's risky, and Y/N, I authorize it. Please, I'll sign anything. Just save her." The doctor nodded, his expression softening as he gestured for a nurse to bring the forms. Y/N's hands shook as she scribbled her signature, barely able to see through the tears that blurred her vision. Her mother was wheeled away, and she was left standing there, soaked and shivering, alone in the harsh light of the ER. Y/N's POV. As they took my mother into surgery, and I was left staring at the swinging doors as they shut behind her. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back against the cold wall of the waiting room. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but all I could do was cry, the sobs racking my body until there was nothing left but a hollow, empty feeling that scared me more than anything. I can't lose her. I can't. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for my clothes to dry, and for the nurses to give me sympathetic looks as they passed by. Hours blended into each other, and I lost track of time. All I knew was the cold, empty chair and the oppressive silence of the hospital waiting room. Later that day. Jungkook's POV. I couldn't shake the image of her wide, frantic eyes, the way she had stumbled into me as though the world itself was closing in around her. The brief moment we had shared, the fleeting contact, felt like a strange pause in time, a snapshot that I couldn't seem to forget. I shook my head, trying to refocus on the business at hand, but my mind kept drifting back to her. Why had she looked so lost? Her panicked expression stayed with me, a nagging thought in the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. It was a rare thing for me to become this distracted, but for some reason, I couldn't help it. I'd been busy with the company's expansion plans and the recent deal in Spain, but now, even as I signed a few final papers, my attention kept slipping. I wanted to know more about her. Why was she so frazzled? What had caused her to look so overwhelmed? It was clear that something was weighing heavily on her. Jimin's words echoed in my mind, "You'd like her if you got to know her." That made me pause. Normally, I wouldn't give much thought to people I barely knew, especially those who worked under my radar. But there was something different about her, something raw and vulnerable that intrigued me in a way I wasn't used to. I'd always been in control, my emotions carefully guarded, but her presence stirred something I couldn't quite define. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my pen against the desk, lost in thought. "She's good," Jimin had said. "Doesn't cause trouble." But what kind of good was that? Why did it feel like she was running from something? I couldn't get the image of her rushing away out of my head, disappearing into the hall. She hadn't even looked back, hadn't given me a chance to ask if she was okay. Maybe it was a simple accident, just a random bump in the hallway. But for some reason, I couldn't dismiss it. There was something about her that made me want to understand. I stood up from my desk, pacing for a moment, before sitting back down with a sigh. What was I doing? Getting caught up in someone else's mess, someone I barely knew? I couldn't afford distractions, not when the stakes were so high. The company needed my attention. My reputation, the deals I was orchestrating, everything had to be perfect. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, I told myself, but the gnawing curiosity refused to fade. I had to know more about Y/N, the girl who had bumped into me and disappeared. The girl who, for reasons I couldn't explain, had somehow gotten under my skin. I didn't care if she worked here part-time or if it was just a chance encounter. Something told me that this wasn't just a random moment in the office hallway. And so, for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to wonder, what kind of person was she, really? And why couldn't I get her out of my head? Y/N's POV. The surgery had taken hours, and the minutes that ticked by felt like days. I sat in the waiting room, the cold hospital chairs biting into my back, but I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, trying to hold on to the hope that I didn't want to lose. My mother was all I had left, and without her, I didn't know what I would do. I kept repeating the same words to myself, "She has to be okay. She has to be okay. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor walked in. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat tight with anticipation. The moment the doctor approached me, I stood up, desperate for any sign that she had made it through. "Doctor, the surgery went well. Your mother is stable for now. She'll need time to recover, but we're hopeful." Y/N, breathing a sigh of relief, voice breaking, "Thank you. Thank you so much." The doctor nodded, offering a kind, reassuring smile before leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank back into the chair, my hands shaking from the adrenaline that had coursed through me since I got the call. I had fought with everything I had to get her the help she needed. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Next day morning. Y/N's POV. The sterile smell of the hospital filled the air, mixing with the hum of machines and the distant sounds of nurses rushing to and fro. I sat beside Mom's bed, holding her frail hand in mine as she rested. Her face was pale, her eyes closed in a peaceful sleep, but I knew better than to think everything was okay. The doctor had spoken with me earlier, telling me that her condition was not improving as hoped. My heart sank with every word. But the most crushing part? The bills. Each new treatment meant another invoice, another call I couldn't make, another payment I couldn't afford. I glanced at the pile of medical papers resting on the table beside me. The numbers blurred in my vision, my head spinning from the weight of it all. I'd been trying to keep it together for Mom's sake, but the pressure was unbearable. I couldn't keep up with the payments, and I didn't want her to feel the burden of it. She had enough to deal with. I sighed, rubbing my forehead, feeling tears threatening to spill. Y/N. I looked up, startled, to see Mom's eyes flutter open. She smiled weakly at me, her voice soft. "You look like you've been through a war." I tried to smile back, but it felt forced, like the weight of everything was pulling me down too much for me to pretend everything was fine. "Just tired, Mom." She reached out with a trembling hand, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "You don't have to do it alone, sweetheart. You've always been so strong for me, but you don't have to carry everything on your own. Not now." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up as my emotions tangled together. I wanted to tell her everything, the fear, the anxiety, the pressure. But instead, I just squeezed her hand tighter, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. "I'll figure it out," I whispered, even though I didn't believe it. "I always do." She didn't press me further, but I could see the concern in her eyes. It was the same look she'd always had when she saw me trying to protect her from the world. She knew how much I hated asking for help, and how stubborn I could be, especially now when everything felt so out of reach. But the truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. The hospital bills were piling up, and my savings were running dry. I couldn't let her suffer, but I didn't know where else to turn. Author's POV. The next day, the office was buzzing again, meetings, presentations, and the usual hustle of a busy morning. Jungkook sat in his office, skimming through a report when Jimin walked in with a light knock. Jimin's energy was unmistakable, his cheerful smile lighting up the room as he approached Jungkook's desk. Jungkook looked up, putting down the documents he was reviewing. "Hyung, is everything set for the board meeting later today?" "Almost," Jimin replied with a confident nod. "But there's one more document we need. The finalized financial report for last quarter. Y/N has it. I'll get her to bring it over." At the mention of Y/N's name, Jungkook's attention sharpened. He remembered the frantic girl from the day before, and a flicker of curiosity sparked in his eyes. Jimin noticed the shift and chuckled under his breath. "What's so funny?" Jungkook asked, narrowing his gaze. "Nothing," Jimin said with a teasing grin. "I just didn't expect you to take an interest in the new part-timer. But don't worry, I'll introduce you properly this time." Jungkook didn't respond, but his thoughts were already turning. He was eager to see her again, to understand why she had been so out of sorts.